One of the things that I like to discuss on this channel are ancient texts. And many of you very well know that I also bring up biblical texts, although I have never dedicated an entire show to discussing the Bible. Mainly because there are so many of you who have this book in your homes. It's readily available for you to open up and read. I use the Bible as a basis, as a foundation. And so from time to time you will hear me recite verses and discuss events described in the Bible as a reference. Why do you always talk about the Bible? Why don't you talk about other texts? Mwah. Because, my dear, I believe an educated person knows a little something about the Bible, whether they believe in it or not. I use it as a basis for the understanding of historical accounts of what I believe to be true. And many of you already know of certain stories and events that occur in the Bible. So what I do is I try to expand upon that. I present information found in other texts that are not so readily available, that many people have heard of before, but never really had the time to explore. Which brings us to what may be the world's first religious text, and that is the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. Now, the purpose of this book was to be a guide, a companion text for one's journey into the afterlife and path to immortality. Now remember, for the ancient Egyptians, magic and preoccupation with death was actually part of normal life. And so what we have here is a book of magic spells. So here we go. We're about to dive into something that may give us a bit of insight and understanding of why ancient Egyptian culture was the way it was. The question is, how did these ancient people gain such knowledge about the afterlife? Was it made up? Was it taught to them? What is actually written in this book? Well, let's find out as we take a closer look into the papyrus of Ani. So let me just say this. This book, if you look at its history of how it was created, one could attest that at that time, this was nothing more than a scam to make money. Rewritten over and over again, custom to the buyer. And what's very interesting is that being the first religious text, some believe that the Bible is nothing more than a plagiarized copy, particularly the New Testament. But you cannot plagiarize history if it is true. And from what I understand, Moses was a native Egyptian. Or am I thinking about someone else? Besides, this book was never intended to be the Egyptian Bible. Now this book, the Papyrus of Ani, the book of coming forth by day, is a ritualistic text chock full of spells, custom spells, designed to aid and protect the soul into the afterlife, which only very few Egyptians possessed. So let's first talk about this Ani character, who was an Egyptian priest from the city of Thebes, as they say, between 1600 and 1200 BCE. He was a royal scribe whose initial job was to keep track of the offerings made to the gods, like a bookkeeper or accountant. He was also in charge of the grants or blessings given to people who made these offerings. The Book of the Dead is actually a rendition of the older coffin texts, which were from the older pyramid texts, which were derived from the old theology and myths of the ancient lowercase g's like Ra, Osiris, Set, Isis, Horus. Thoth, which you can probably trace back to ancient Sumer. Different names, of course, but we know where all these ideas come from, okay? And I have a bunch of other texts to cover that may be linked to this as well. We'll get into those another time. These writings, let's call them, were originally exclusive to the kings of Egypt. Later on, they were sold to members of the noble elite class. And then later on, they were sold to everyone who could afford them. Now, Ani, being married with children, really could not afford to have another scribe forge a custom copy of the text, as he was very concerned for the well-being of his soul. I mean, to have a copy of this book made was extremely expensive. This thing would have cost about a half year of wages on Ani's salary. So, as a result, we end up with the most well-known copy of the Book of the Dead, the Papyrus of Ani, one of some 25,000 copies, some of which the names of the owners were left blank, so if you wanted one, all they had to do was write in your name in the blank spaces. And there you go, your own custom Book of the Dead, with variations in spells, as they were set to mass produce them. And Ani's 78-foot scroll contains around 65 spells, prayers, incantations, what have you, and over 150 illustrations, which can be viewed at the British Museum in London, which, by the way, we may or may not have known about, given that Egypt has this thing about hiding their artifacts. You see, a lot of people don't know this, but the pyramids are heavily guarded. They don't want you to go into certain areas or take pictures of certain artifacts. I mean, they will let 1 million people die before they let anything happen to their precious pyramids. And the jackass head of antiquities, who I call the general, is there to make sure of it. Now, when I say spell, what I mean is there are words or utterances that are supposed to have a magical effect when recited. And there are hundreds of these spells that have been recorded. However, they never use all of them in one sitting. Ani's Book of the Dead is about 200 protective magic spells, of which contains information on how to approach the gods of the underworld. It contains spells to preserve the spirit, spells to enable one to breathe and drink, protection spells, information on how to navigate the underworld or duat, how to get through its gates, caverns, guards. It points out the right words to use during judgment. Since the ancient Egyptians were into death and making preparations for death, the Book of the Dead was thought to be a necessity for passing on. And so, magic, the use of amulets, charms, jewels, became a very big deal in those days. They believed that preparing the body after death or mummification was the key to keeping the soul intact for the purpose of eternal life. They also believed that you would need certain tools to take with you, even though you would have the god Anubis, the god of the dead, to guide you through it. They considered the journey through the underworld to be quite dangerous. They had the idea that Osiris and 42 other judges would be waiting for them so that they could be judged accordingly. If it turned out that you led a good life, you would be granted permission to enter into a perfect, beautiful version of Egypt. But if you led a bad life, you would be handed over to the devourer of the dead, which is not too far off from what many other religions believe in today. Now, mummification was a pretty extensive process and ritual. The priest would wear the mask of Anubis during the process of embalming. They would use a hook inserted into the nose to pull out the brain, which may have been discarded because they didn't really believe that the brain was of any value. They would make an incision alongside the torso to remove the internal organs. They would let those dry out, and then they were placed in canopic jars, except the heart, because they believed that the heart did the job of what we know the brain does. They would inject a resin inside the skull to prevent bacterial growth and rinse the rest of the body's cavity with spices and wine. They would then cure the body in salt for a little over 2 months. And in between that, they would stuff the body to make it look more human. After the curing process, they would lube the corpse up with oils and wrap it meticulously in bandages. They covered the body front and back with protective amulets and jewels. Then the body was placed into a sarcophagus and buried. And I'm pretty sure your soul would have been left town already before they were even finished with all that. But hey, that's what they were selling back then. Now, if your soul is still waiting around after all this, you would be led from the tomb by Anubis to stand in judgment before Osiris, Thoth, and the 42 judges. The 42 judges or nomes are of the 42 districts of Egypt, and each one represents a particular sin or confession. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, here's Ani's 42 negative confessions. The first being, I have not committed sin. The others are, I have not committed robbery with violence. I have not stolen. I have not slain men and women. I have not stolen grain. I have not purloined or stolen offerings. I have not stolen the property of God. I have not uttered lies. I have not carried away food. I have not uttered curses. I have not committed adultery. I have made none to weep. I have not eaten the heart. I have not attacked any man. I am not a man of deceit. I have not stolen cultivated land. I have not been an eavesdropper. I have not slandered anyone. I have not been angry without just cause. I have not debauched or slept with the wife of any man. I have not debauched or screwed the wives of other men. I have not polluted myself. I have terrorized none. I have not transgressed the law. I have not been angry. Yeah, you said that already. I have not shut my ears to the words of truth. I have not blasphemed. I am not a man of violence. I have not been a stirrer up of strife. I have not acted with undue haste. I have not pried into others' matters. I have not multiplied my words in speaking. I beg to differ. I have wronged none. I have done no evil. You said that already too. I have not worked witchcraft against the king. I have never stopped the flow of water of a neighbor. Okay. I have never raised my voice. Really? Never? I have not cursed God. I have not acted with arrogance. I have not stolen the bread of the gods. I have not carried away the kenfu cakes from the spirits of the dead. I have not snatched away the bread of the child, nor treated with contempt the God of my city. And finally, I have not slain the cattle belonging to the God. Now, as you very well may have gathered, a lot of what the ancient Egyptians believed varied from person to person by convenience. Even the 42 negative confessions varied. Really, their stuff is all over the place because there are so many writers and kings and gods who can keep up. Even Egyptologists can't keep up. The Egyptians were quite fluid in beliefs and rituals and ways of life as time went on, as does every civilization experience as time goes on. I mean, look at today's world and how much values, language, and beliefs have changed overall in just the past century. This book revolves around their ancient gods. It is a great source or look into the ancient Egyptian beliefs of life and death, primarily. And because of Thoth, the hieroglyphs themselves were believed to hold magical energy. And this is pretty much the Book of the Dead, or Ani's version of it anyway, which is not really a book, but a set of selected spells that go way back over 1,000 years before Ani. And yeah, so I know the Book of the Dead, ooh, scary. Not so scary when you have a better understanding, right? The Book of the Dead. That's not even really what it's called. I'll return to this book when needed. I just wanted to make sure you all knew a little something about it so that when we discuss other topics, you know what I'm talking about. And then one day we'll be able to put all these videos on related topics together to get a broader and better understanding of the world that once surrounded the Mediterranean. Until next time, there is lots more to cover. Hope you all enjoyed this brief presentation and got something out of it. And I'm sure those of you who are interested will dig deeper into this. So everyone, stay awake, stay aware, stay safe, and I'll talk to you all soon.